Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we will be looking at AQA AS Psychology 2023 Paper 1 Exemplar Answers for Attachment, which you need to know for AQA A-Level Psychology. I hope you enjoy this video and find it helpful. Let's get started. Please note that these answers have been produced with knowledge of the mark scheme but have not been approved by the mark scheme themselves. There are 3 assessment objectives, AOs, in psychology. In this video they are color-coded. AO1 Knowledge, purple. AO2 Application, blue. AO3 Evaluation, red and green. In AS there are 12 mark questions, instead of 16 mark questions. For the purpose of this video and to avoid confusion for A-Level, the 12 mark questions have been turned into 16 mark questions. Question 1. Explain the role of the internal working model in Bowlby's monotropic theory of attachment. 4 marks. Bowlby argued that an infant forms a mental representation of their first relationship with their primary attachment figure, known as an internal working model. This internal working model serves as a template or blueprint for what all relationships are like. An infant, whose first experience is a loving relationship with a reliable caregiver, will tend to form a positive internal working model, with the expectation that all relationships are loving and reliable, causing them to become a consistent, sensitive, and responsive caregiver. However, a child whose first relationship involves poor treatment and neglect may expect such treatment from others and will tend to form a negative internal working model, with the expectation that all relationships are abusive and harmful, causing them to become an inconsistent and neglectful caregiver. Depending on what type of internal working model the infant forms, this will affect the infant's later ability to make friends and be a parent. This also provides the infant with an insight into their caregiver's behavior and some level of influence, so a relationship can form between the two. In the 1990s, many children were found living in poor-quality orphanages in Romania. Sema and her sister Kati lived in one of these orphanages from birth but were later adopted. When they were adopted, Sema was 5 months old and Kati was 5 years old. Their development was then studied for several years. Question 2. Using your knowledge of the Romanian orphan studies, explain how Kati's development is likely to have differed from Sema's as they grew older. 6 marks. Kati was adopted at 5 years and therefore any effects may be more severe, long-term and harder to overcome than the effects on Sema, who was adopted before 6 months. Kati may struggle more at school than Sema and may not learn new behaviors, concepts as quickly. Kati may find it harder to learn her language and social skills than Sema. Kati is more likely to show insecure attachment than Sema, who is more likely to develop a secure attachment. Kati may not know what counts as appropriate behavior towards strangers and Kati may experience more temper tantrums, show more attention-seeking behavior. Kati may also have more difficulty interacting with peers, forming close relationships. Question 3. Briefly explain one economic implication of the findings of research into the role of the father in attachment. 2 marks. 1 economic implication of researcher into the role of the father is that it has caused an increasingly number of fathers remain at home and therefore contribute less to the economy. Consequently, more mothers may return to work and contribute more to the economy. This has also led to changes in the law on paternity leave and shared parental leave, also reducing the gender pay gap, making parental roles more equal. Question 4. Discuss the learning theory explanation of attachment. 16 marks. Doland and Miller, 1950, behaviorists, proposed that caregiver-infant attachments can be explained by the learning theory, also known as the cupboard love theory, where an infant learns to associate a caregiver with a feeling of pleasure when they are fed, classical conditioning, and an infant is reinforced in the behaviors that produce these desirable responses from a caregiver, operant conditioning. Therefore, children learn to love those who feed them. The learning theory suggests that in the case of caregiver-infant attachments, food serves as an unconditioned stimulus, UCS, to which a feeding infant has an unconditioned response, UCR, of pleasure. A caregiver starts as a neutral stimulus, NS, to which an infant has a neutral response, NR, of no response. When over time the same caregiver provides the infant with food, the caregiver starts to become associated with the food, until the infant views seeing the caregiver with the expectation that they will provide them with food, and the caregiver becomes a conditioned stimulus, CS, producing a conditioned response, CR, of pleasure. Through this process an attachment forms, where the caregiver becomes an attachment figure to the infant, and the infant eventually learns to associate the caregiver with pleasure without the food needing to be present. The learning theory also suggests that this behavior from the infant is positively and negatively reinforced. When an infant is hungry, they feel discomfort and pain and want to remove these unwanted feelings, so desire food, a primary reinforcer, something that naturally encourages behavior. They therefore cry, to which a caregiver responds with a comforting social suppressor behavior of feeding. The infant's behavior of crying is therefore positively reinforced, as they are rewarded with something pleasant, food. The infant's behavior of crying is also negatively reinforced, as the unpleasant feeling of being hungry is removed. Both of these increase the likelihood that the infant will repeat the crying behavior again. The child therefore displays proximity-seeking and attachment behavior with the caregiver, as the caregiver becomes a secondary reinforcer, something that is associated with the primary reinforcer to encourage behavior, and a source of reward, food, and remover of unwanted feelings, hunger. The caregiver's behavior is also negatively reinforced. When the caregiver feeds the infant stops crying. The caregiver's behavior of feeding is therefore negatively reinforced, as the unpleasant sound of the infant crying is removed and the caregiver experiences parental relief. This increases the likelihood that the caregiver will repeat the feeding behavior again. This reinforcement is a two-way mutual process, which strengthens the attachment between caregiver and infant. The learning theory draws on the concept of drive reduction. Sears et al., 1957, suggested that hunger is a primary drive, being an innate and biological motivator, and attachment is a secondary drive learnt through the association between the caregiver and the satisfaction of the primary drive of hunger. Humans are motivated to eat in order to reduce the hunger drive, and therefore infants learn to associate the caregiver with the reduction and satisfaction of hunger. A strength of the learning theory as an explanation of attachment is that it provides a plausible and scientific explanation of attachment formations. The learning theory is founded in an already established theory, as humans do learn from association and reinforcement. It is likely that there is an association between the provision of needs and the person providing those needs, leading to strong attachments. Furthermore, with the learning theory being based on behaviorism, it has supporting research. Pavlov demonstrated the process of classical conditioning in dogs, and Skinner demonstrated the process of operant conditioning with mice and pigeons. This is a strength because it implies that the process of attachment formation is intricately tied to how individuals learn from their experiences and interactions, reinforcing the bond between meeting needs and developing strong emotional connections. With the empirical support from Pavlov and Skinner's research further solidifies the credibility of the learning theory in explaining the mechanisms underlying attachment in various settings. A limitation of the learning theory as an explanation of attachment is that it suggests that infants play a relatively passive role in the development of an attachment, simply responding to associations with comfort or reward. However, Feldman and Eidelman, 2007, found that babies take a very active role in the interactions that produce an attachment. This is a limitation because it suggests that the learning theory fails to fully capture the dynamic and active involvement of infants in the formation of their attachments, portraying them as passive recipients of conditioning rather than active participants in shaping their emotional bonds. A limitation of the learning theory as an explanation of attachment is that it takes a reductionist approach. The learning theory focuses on basic processes, with a stimulus and response link and reinforcement. This is too simplistic to explain complex attachment behaviors and ignores all cognitive processes, emotions that influence attachment. This also cannot explain why attachment occurs, unlike Bowlby's monotropic attachment theory, which provides a more holistic explanation. Bowlby argued the advantages centered around protection and survival, which is more in line with our understanding of evolution. This is a limitation because it suggests that the learning theory's simplistic view, concentrating on stimulus-response connections and reinforcement, falls short in explaining the intricate attachment behaviors shaped by cognitive processes and emotions, unlike Bowlby's monotropic attachment theory, which offers a more holistic perspective rooted in evolutionary advantages related to protection and survival. A limitation of the learning theory as an explanation of attachment is that it is contradicted by human research. Schaefer and Emerson, 1964, found that the majority of infants tended to form their primary attachment with their mothers, who was most responsive to the infant's needs, regardless of whether she was the one who fed them, and therefore an infant's primary attachment figure is not always the person who feeds them. They also found that 39% of the infants were not attached to the person primarily involved in their physical care. This is a limitation because it suggests that the learning theory's focus on food as the primary driver of attachment is contradicted by human research, as shown in the study by Schaefer and Emerson, 1964. Their findings indicate that infants form their primary attachment with individuals who are most responsive to their needs, not necessarily the ones who provide food. This challenges the notion that feeding alone is the key factor in forming attachments, highlighting the importance of emotional responsiveness and care in attachment relationships. Thank you for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Bye.